Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, where we are going to be exploring results from our latest risk and compliance survey and report. We have a lot to cover today. We're really excited that you joined us. Before we get started, just want to do a few housekeeping items, and those include, you will notice that there are several windows on your screen. Please feel free to resize or minimize those based on your viewing preferences. Once a window has been minimized, you can find it back in the left-hand menu icons, including any additional widgets that didn't open upon logging in. You can also access and download the full report as well as the presentation slides using the resources window in this console. And these will also be emailed to you along with the recording after the event. Really encourage you to download the full report. There is far more information in the report than we are able to share today on the webinar. Please engage with your peers during the session using the attendee group chat. We always have great dialogue going on among the attendees, and we look forward to seeing that. If you do have any technical questions or questions for us as the presenters, please submit those in the Q&A box, as we will not be monitoring the attendee chat as much as we will be looking at the Q&A chat box to us. If you're seeking a certificate of attendance or CCB or HRCI credits, you must meet the minimum requirements of this session. Please reference these requirements and instructions in the resource window. There's also another slide coming up where you will see that again, but there are requirements and instructions to meet for these credits. So also please note, and we'll mention it when we do the polling, to be eligible for the credits, you also must interact with the polling questions throughout the session in order for us to verify your participation in the webinar. So please submit responses as each poll launches during the webcast. So now I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce ourselves, our speakers. Really excited to have a great team with me today, but I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Carrie Penman. I'm the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer here at NAVEX, and I've been here almost 22 years. Before that, I was the first Ethics and Compliance Officer at Westinghouse in Pittsburgh, and in between, I spent some time at the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. So my primary responsibilities are internal to our NAVEX program, but I love doing this opportunity to have thought leadership and do research with our great team. So now I'm going to turn it over to my great friend and colleague, Shon Ramey.
Carrie, thank you so very much. Shon Ramey, Chief Legal Officer at NAVEX Global. I'm clearly a rookie in that I've only been here 12 years at NAVEX Global, where I'm responsible for legal, privacy. I work with Carrie on the compliance function, and between the two of us and our great partner in HR, we manage our compliance and risk obligations at NAVEX Global internally and assist our customers in doing so as well. Very glad to be here with everyone. I'll turn it over to Matt Kelly.
All right, thank you. And yes, I am Matt Kelly, and thank you everybody for having us here today. I am a partner and friend of NAVEX in the compliance community. I publish a newsletter, Radical Compliance, about corporate audit, ethics, and compliance issues, and I've been doing that for nearly 10 years. Before that, I was the editor of Compliance Week for 10 and 12 years. So in one form or another, I've been writing about corporate compliance and audit and risk management issues since 2003. Somebody recently said to me, "You must be the oldest writer in this profession." And I said, "Thank you for that very generous, somewhat insulting comment, but I love this field. I'd be happy to keep on writing about it for many more years." And I do work with NAVEX on numerous projects like this. We have plenty of stuff we can talk about, so I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Gabe?
And I'm Gabe Rosenwasser. I'm a research director at the Harris Poll. We've been partnering with NAVEX on this research for 4 years now, and it's been a pleasure over those 4 years. Great to be here on the webinar. For the second year, I lead a team of researchers at Harris, 2 of which worked on this project, Brian and Andrea, and are on the line to help answer any questions you have about the data. I'm excited to get into it with you guys today.
Fantastic. All right. I mentioned that there's some instructions for obtaining credit. These instructions are in the widgets as well as here on this deck. So from there, I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about our agenda today. As Gabe mentioned, for this year, once again, we have partnered with the Harris Poll and also Gabe to survey with risk and compliance professionals, really from a wide range of industries, about the design, the priorities, and the performance of their risk and compliance programs. And so we have a lot to cover, as you can see in this agenda. And so I think it's probably best to just get into it. And so we'll go into sort of the summary of some of the key findings that we had. Everybody's talking about AI, so we will be as well, talking a little bit about that. One of the things we're really excited to cover today, many of you have asked in prior years for data on how we're running investigations. Are they centralized? Are they decentralized? How many people? You asked, we asked, and we have some data on that for you as well. We had some consistent, but also some concerning findings around board engagement, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We also had some interesting findings around third-party screenings and what organizations are and are not doing in this area. One area that we're not going to cover here today, but is in the report, is that we were interested to find that ESG does remain a priority for risk and compliance, perhaps more so as sustainability now in terms of the terminology, but also perhaps because we did have a good rate of response from outside the US. And so those all could be factors. Maybe I'll jump to the bottom one. I think one of the things that is perhaps an ongoing concern for all of us is that many of the programs that responded still lack internal reporting programs and anti-retaliation policies. And that's a little bit of a concern that we will get into it as we go. So as I mentioned, please go ahead and download the report. There is so much more data, so much more information than we could possibly cover today, but we're going to just cover a few highlights. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gabe to talk a little bit about the methodology used by the Harris Poll. And Gabe, I just really want to thank you for the partnership with NAVEX. Really, really appreciate working with you. It's been a wonderful project to work on.
Thank you, Carrie. It's been a pleasure for us to work with NAVEX and see how this program has grown over the last couple of years. So my role here today is really to help ground us in how the research was conducted, who we spoke to, when it occurred, and just make sure that we're kind of coming to the data points that the rest of the team will share with a shared and unified understanding. And so respondents for this research are sourced through two channels. They come from NAVEX's client and prospect lists, and then from panels of people who the Harris Poll has relationships with that have agreed to take surveys and who meet the qualifying criteria for the survey. That qualification criteria included being 18 years or older, expressing knowledge about risk and compliance, and holding a job title in one of the qualifying job titles. The survey was administered online. Respondents were invited with survey links. They opted in, qualified through the criteria. And in total, we ended up with just under 1,000 respondents, which is a nice, robust sample, and gives us a lot of data and insights to draw from. The survey fielded through end of April through the end of May. One important note is when looking at results, as we mentioned, there are previous waves of the research that were conducted. There are some differences in sample size and composition, so you just want to keep that in mind when making comparisons over time. Digging into a little bit more detail about who these respondents were. So again, we had a total of 999 respondents. Around 1/3 of them came from NAVEX's customer prospect lists, and 2/3 came from our panel of respondents. When we look at the breakdown by country, around half of the respondents were based in the US, and the other half came globally, most notably from the UK, France, and Germany. There were some other respondents sprinkled along through Japan, India, Mexico, Canada. And those were kind of some key categories in that other bucket. When we look at job function, the majority of respondents, their primary job function is in compliance, and that was just under 30%. We had just under 15% in information security, and then around 10 in each of risk, human resources, finance, and supply chain and procurement. Other job functions that ladder into that 21% that are in the other bucket, some of the key ones there included legal, data, privacy, audit, and sustainability. And then finally, when we look at respondents by industry, revenue, and the number of employees that the companies that they work for are in the industry side of things, around 10% or so each in manufacturing, healthcare and social assistance, finance and insurance, and professional, scientific, and technical services. And then going down the list, we see around 5% in retail, construction, transportation and warehousing, and educational services. Again, around 30% were in the all other industry buckets, and that tends to include things such as wholesale trade, public administration, utilities, and food services. We had a nice mix of respondents coming from companies in different revenue sides. So big balance there of those that were smaller companies, less than 50 million, 50 to 100 million, and $1 billion or more. Somewhat close to even splits across those. And then on the employee count size also, about a third of the respondents were in companies with 1,000 employees or less. Around a third were in the 10,000 or more category, and then a third or so in between those two buckets. So what we're really trying to demonstrate with this, the big takeaways is that we cast a pretty wide net across the compliance landscape, looking at respondents across geography, function, industry, and company size. And that really ensures that the results of this study are comprehensive and do cover this industry at large. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Shon to take us through the next section where we'll start to dive into the detailed questions. And again, if you have any questions about the methodology of the survey, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and my team and I will be happy to answer them for you.
Excellent, Gabe. Thank you, and thank you to the Harris poll. I think comprehensive is absolutely the best word to describe it. Very, very pleased to again work with the Harris poll and be able to come up with all these findings. On these findings, I want to set a little bit of context here and talk about where the function sits. Maybe a lot of you had questions on that in the past. So in response to the question at the bottom, which function is responsible for your organization's compliance program, the results are on the screen. Nearly half of the respondents said the compliance program was either an independent function reporting to the CEO and or board of directors, 22%, legal at 15%, and you'll see risk at 12%. As Gabe mentioned, I want to caveat here, year-over-year comparisons aren't strictly possible. A small share of our 2025 respondent base said their compliance function reported to legal compared to our base in 24, 15 versus 21. Same was true for those who said their compliance function was split across multiple departments, 17% versus 23%.
So Shon, I think it's interesting to note that that we are up a little bit, and it's almost a quarter of the respondents saying that they are independent and reporting to the CEO. So would love to see all of you who are attending today, maybe just add to the attendee chat and share with one another where your compliance function sits in your organization. I think it might be some interesting chatter about that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Karen. Yeah, I would very much again encourage the respondents. I would be very interested to see if that compares similarly across the folks that are watching our webinar today. With that, the next question that we posed, or that Harris posed in the poll, was, has your organization experienced any of the following compliance issues? And please select all that apply. The number one was a privacy or security breach. In 2025, 28% of their organization experienced a data privacy or cybersecurity breach. That's consistent with 2024 at 28%. Full 10% points greater than the next most commonly indicated compliance issue, third-party ethics or compliance failure at 18%, as you see on the screen. I found that very interesting. The prevalence of third-party compliance issues, regulators, and I know for NAVEX Global, our customers, increasingly demanding that organizations, for all the right reasons, maintain an ethical and compliant supply chain. 56% of respondents said their organization had experienced at least one compliance failure in the past 3 years. 36% said their organization had experienced more than one. And kudos to the bottom bar, where 35% indicated that their organization had not experienced any compliance issues in the past 3 years. That's very commendable. I'll move us on then to our next. In response to the question, which of the following compliance issues are most important to your organization? 25%, am I in the right one there? Yes, I am. Indicated that regulatory compliance at 24% was their highest compliance issue, their most important, with data privacy protection and security coming in at 23% as the organizations. Last year's cohort, a greater share of respondents, 29%, rated regulatory compliance at the top of their top 3 issues, and a slightly smaller share of 20% rated data privacy. Again, with cautions for year-over-year comparison, found it interesting, maybe the potential for reduced regulatory pressure in the US based on what we're seeing from an enforcement standpoint might explain the potential decline in priority for regulatory compliance. And what we experience and in interacting with our customers on a daily basis, potentially the rise of AI in organizations and gathering and use of data might be accounting for the increase in data privacy percentage. Additional findings that weren't included in this chart. The respondents representing more mature organizations, they identified themselves as managing / optimizing. They were less likely, 21%, to say regulatory compliance was their number one most important compliance issue, compared with other maturity levels, including underdeveloped, defining at 30%. I think that reflects the fact that the more mature managing, optimizing organizations hopefully have a better handle on their regulatory compliance requirements. Any other thoughts from the panel on this?
Well,
oh, go ahead, Matt.
Sure, I'll jump in that, Shon, I think your analysis there is right, that the more mature ones are less likely to worry about regulatory compliance, or to say it was their number one. I will never say that regulatory compliance is easy. However, if you do have a very strong program, then regulatory compliance is more of a straightforward, potentially tedious process, but you know how to handle it. And therefore, you could maybe focus on some of the other more challenging issues, such as integrating artificial intelligence, where I don't think anybody knows how to handle that yet. And the more that you can sort of internalize the processes for regulatory compliance, the more you can focus on the other stuff that has no clear answer right now, AI certainly being one. And yes, we should acknowledge that there's going to be a diminished interest in strict regulatory enforcement these days. You can, I wouldn't say worry about it less, but you always know that if we self-disclose, cooperate, and remediate, we're probably going to get a declination. Again, that's not easy, but at least it's very clear, as opposed to wondering how are we going to deal with this regulation. So a lot of that, that the maturity pays off. That totally tracks when you sit down and think about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And Carrie?
I would just make one quick note that it was interesting to see DEI make the top list of concerns. And I guess my question for the group chat is wondering if this is because it's a key priority or because it's in response to figuring out, how organizations are going to respond to the current administration's focus on DEI. So just would love to see some thoughts in the chat on that as well.
Fabulous. Thank you both very much. Next, we're going to move to staffing for internal reporting programs and how that's managed. That's in response to many questions that we've received in the past. The next few slides are going to address that, staffing, managing internal reporting, and investigations. In response to the question, how many personnel are supporting your internal reporting program at your organization? The findings were that an organization's internal reporting program, generally, it was interesting, sat on either side of a distribution between 1 and 5 or more than 30. 1 and 5 at 19%, more than 30 at 34%, as you see on the slide. Additional findings not included in this chart, not surprisingly, the smallest organizations defined as 0 to 999 employees most likely say they had between 1 and 5 personnel. 30% indicated that. Even some organizations, though, with 10,000 or more were said to have the same level of staffing, which I found interesting / concerning, at 11% identifying that. Also, I found interesting that share of respondents who said they had more than 30 personnel supporting their program was not the greatest for the largest organizations. 0 to 999, 24%. And this again for more than 30 personnel. 1,000 to 9,999 at 41%. And then at 10,000 or more down to 36%. Was just an interesting findings that came out of the Harris poll report. Move on next to centralized versus decentralized and how the poll came out on that. When asked which of the following best describes how your organization approaches its day-to-day compliance investigation programs, most common was, as you can see on the screen, 67%. They structure day-to-day compliance programs as centralized. And then 23% of our respondents said they use a decentralized approach to their investigations. And when we talk about staffing on those, it was interesting. 33% of those with a centralized program said they have between 1 and 5 investigators assigned to the program. And that was compared to 28% who said they had the same for decentralized programs.
So there we have it. We had the big question every year, centralized or decentralized. So there we have it, centralized.
Yeah, right. 2/3 right there. We've got 67%. So that is very interesting. Next, moving on to when asked about, again, the centralized versus decentralized programs, Centralized programs were also less commonly said to have more than 30 investigators. You can see that at 12% on the slide, compared to decentralized programs having 16% said that. In addition to what you see on the screen there, those findings not included, organizations with more mature programs were far more likely at 73% than those with less mature programs, 55%, to say they had a centralized investigation program. Organizations with between 1,000 and 9,999 most likely to have, at 72%, centralized investigation program, compared to 10,000 plus, 66%. And then on the smaller end, 0 to 999 at 62%. Next, we'll move to the next, where we have a poll question reminding you, if you want certification for this, please interact with the poll.
All right, so which of the following best describes how your organization approaches its day-to-day compliance investigations program? And the answer choices are: we have a centralized investigations and compliance has full access to the findings, or we have centralized investigations and compliance has limited or no access to findings. Third, we have decentralized investigations and compliance has full access to findings, or we have decentralized investigations and compliance has limited access. So a lot of options here, but we're really trying to find out, especially if we're decentralized, are we seeing the data? Are we seeing the findings and the results? So I think we'll let it close in a few seconds.
Interesting.
Yep, as it's coming in. Oops, we needed to go back and push the results. There we go. Everybody see them?
Yes.
It looks like we've got 320 or almost 61% saying centralized and full access. The rest were significantly lower, between 10 and 15% there. So interesting.
And the centralized and decentralized tracks there to what our original findings found, it looks like, or at least comparable.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you for that poll.
Great. Next, we're going to talk about staffing and the current and future changes for U.S. policy and what how that's impacting organization. The specific question: has your organization made or considered making changes to any program elements in light of changes in U.S. government priorities and enforcement priorities? Between 28 and 56% of respondents said their organization either already made or plans to make changes in light of shifts in U.S. government priorities and enforcement policies. That combined response share was greatest for changes to policies, new or current, as you see the fourth bar down, closely followed by risk assessment, training plan and priorities, and code of conduct updates. 52% of respondents said their organization did not plan any decreases to staffing and resources. A greatest share indicated that no previous changes or consideration of future changes. In contrast, 38% said they had or were considering increasing staffing and resources. Additional findings not included in these charts, which I found curious, and maybe because it's the focus of potential changes or concerns about changes, respondents from the US were generally less likely to say their organization has made or is considering making changes to several program elements than those from other countries like France and Germany, United Kingdom, and Japan. For example, 50% of US respondents said their organization has made or is considering changes to risk assessment. And that was compared to 53% in Germany, 64% in Japan, and 66% in France. I found that very interesting. So next, we'll go on to the framework used to inform your program. ISO standards related to compliance program was the largest framework, most common framework used by organizations to inform their compliance program. Following that, 25% saying their organization used the US DOJ guidance to make sure they have an effective compliance program. 20% cited Health and Human Services general compliance program. I'm guessing those would be in the medical field mostly. And then 11% cited other. Additional findings, and again, as Carrie encouraged, I would as well, to download the entire program because we can't cover it all here. Additional findings that you won't find in this chart, at least, were RNC professionals whose organizations are based in EMEA, 65%, and APAC, 67%, were more likely than those based in the Americas, 24%, to say they used ISO standards, which I would expect. Just from an enforcement standpoint, those based in the US, 35% of respondents indicated that they used DOJ guidance to ensure they had effective compliance programs. The ISO standards were more commonly used across professional, scientific, and technical services type organizations at 57%, manufacturing 56%, and finance and insurance at 50%. With that, I will turn it back over to Carrie to talk about program maturity definition.
All right, thank you, Shon. And for those of you who were looking for the results of the poll question, it was posted in the attendee chat. So you can find those responses there, and we'll fix the glitch the next time around for the review of the poll results. Okay, so let's talk just momentarily about program maturity. When we asked the respondents to comment on maturity, we did use the Ethics and Compliance Initiative's definition of maturity. You heard Shon mention those a few times already. They range from underdeveloped to optimizing, and you can see here the definitions for each. It is a 5-point scale, if you will. But note there's really no end to the spectrum, that even the most mature programs still will always have room to refine their approach, and will also always have room to tackle whatever the new issues are that are coming down the pike. So we do have another poll question, and hopefully you all can see it. And that is, where would you place your organization on a spectrum of program maturity? So let's just take a quick poll on this. If you can just take a moment to fill it out. Remember that if you want to get credit for attending, you need to answer the polls. Where would you place your organization on the spectrum of program maturity? Is it in underdeveloped, defining, adapting, managing, or optimizing? So give folks a minute to answer that poll. And while that's happening, Matt, any comments on this so far? I think you're on.
Yes, the one thing I wanted to call out from a couple of slides ago, we talked about who the compliance officer answers to. And now the single largest number was the CEO. That's great. I like it. However, I saw that there was a statistic at the bottom there said 17% the compliance function answers to multiple people or multiple points. And that gave me pause because I wonder about how that can work in practice. And will you find that there are too many different silos there? We dropped the dreaded four-letter word for ethics and compliance program. Silos of oversight or people pulling you in different directions that puts the compliance function on the back foot, especially with the rank and file employees who are supposed to want to pay attention to the importance of ethics and compliance, which of course they should. But that can be harder to do if the compliance function is ping-ponging between different competing interests or oversight, or you're getting conflicting messages, which then will trickle down to the workforce at large. I won't dwell on it more than that, but out of all of the statistics we saw before in Shon's segment, that was the one that made me say, that's not great. I'm not quite sure what to make of that statistic. And if people in that position are on the call and you want to describe it in the group chat, I'd be happy to know how that works in practice. I'm not necessarily sure it would work well.
All right, and hopefully you all can see the results pushed to the audience. I'm gonna hope for a thumbs up on that.
Yeah.
So, but we do see that the majority of folks have put the managing, put themselves in the managing category as the highest. But quite a few, almost 20% in optimizing. That is great. All right, I saw a thumbs up, so we got it. Okay. All right, so Matt, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Sure. So I think that the statistics we just saw in the poll are largely in step with what we're looking at right here. That you can see, okay, 57% of the respondents in the survey said the program was managing or optimizing. Those are the top two tiers. That's good. Strict year-over-year comparisons aren't always possible for this report due to changes in the respondent base and updates to the questions and whatnot. But like overall, I would say we're in a good place. And we are, if you look at the progress from 2023 to 25, slowly but surely, everything is moving in the direction that it should be. The other thing that I wanted to call out for compliance officers who might be in the lower green zones and a little bit freaked out about the maturity of your program. So I just the other day was on another webinar for some Atlanta area compliance people. We were talking about continuous program improvement, which also struck me as something that maybe might leave some compliance officers a little bit unnerved. Continuous improvement does not mean you must be improving all things at all times, always. It's more, do you know what the most important parts of your program are or should be, given what your company does, the risks you have and whatnot? And are those program elements, are you focusing on them? Are those moving in the right directions? Quick example, if you are a US only IT services firm, you don't have to worry about anti-corruption issues that much because you're not exposed to the FCPA if you're only doing business in the United States. But you might have much more attention to data privacy. So maybe there are some policy management questions there. Like, do you understand which parts of your program you really should be paying the most attention to? And are you successful in moving those from the green parts on our screen to the bluer parts of the screen? And if you can do that, you're in good shape. If you can then pull along the rest of the program and make everything great all the time, more power to you. But we don't necessarily need to hyperventilate that your program doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be effective. And that means it's effective at the things that matter the most, to the risk-based approach. I will move on a bit. So here are some other more specific issues that we dug up in these findings. Some of these are not that good. So only 53% of respondents in the 2025 survey said they had a hotline or internal reporting channel. Now, that is striking because it does mean presumably 47% don't have one, or some large portion of that group doesn't have one. Maybe some people don't know, but really we're saying only 53% do. I find that troubling because clearly the administration now is talking about using whistleblowers as a lever to get more enforcement. If you listen to what the Justice Department is saying, they are talking about enforcement of the False Claims Act for a host of potential infractions. And a big part of that is whistleblowers who might leapfrog over you and your program and go directly to regulators to say, I know this issue. And hey, maybe 3 years from now, I could get a big part of the payout for a settlement. So it is incumbent on companies to try and keep your internal whistleblowers on your side. And most people do want to be on their employer's side. But the appeal or the risk or the other people on the sidelines saying, no, no, come over here to our side and tell us, don't pay attention to the compliance program, like that noise is going up. So the importance of having a strong whistleblower program is also going up. Some other statistics here, we saw that in looking at 2024 responses for that group last year, 61% said they had an internal reporting channel. I'm going to presume that doesn't mean that 8% of you disconnected your hotline over the last year to go from 61 to 53. I think it just is probably some sort of variability in the annual sample size of who's in the reports. But nonetheless, it should not be 61%. It should not be 53%. It should be much higher. Only 49% of respondents said their organization has a non-retaliation policy. I think another thing like that should be basic block and tackle, because so often you wind up with an incident and they try to report it internally. The incident is mishandled somehow, and there's a retaliation claim tacked onto it. It's like adding insult to injury at that point. So having the policy, having the training, it really is just, it should be standard form. And here we see 49% saying that they do have a non-retaliation policy. Again, I would like to see that number much higher. Some other findings not included in these charts, but still worth bringing up. So for those representing the large organizations, 10,000 employees and up, they were more likely than the smaller companies to say that the hotline was part of their incident management program. That makes sense. If you're a larger company, you are almost inevitably bumping into some sort of federal law or regulation that requires you have a hotline. So I see that. But for comparison purposes, the smallest organizations, 0 to 1,000 people, 43% of them said they had the hotline, and it was 54% for organizations that are mid-sized, 1,000 to 10,000. And then it jumps up to 68 again for the much larger ones. 46% of respondents with headquarters overseas in the EMEA region, they said they had an internal reporting channel, compared to 59% in North America. Less than half of EMEA respondents with an internal reporting channels. That is surprising because the EU Internal Reporting Directive now has been on the books for several years. Even in Europe now, they have translated that, and almost all European countries, I think everybody in the EU now does have a national law per order of that EU directive that they have a hotline protection law on the books. I get it that Europe had historically been less enamored with anonymous whistleblower hotlines, so I'm not entirely surprised the number is low, but 46% is still, again, like that is uncomfortably low. Think about everything else that those internal whistleblowers, what they could do with their knowledge, and they could take it elsewhere. So I would say that should be a priority. A majority of organizations have risk and compliance. They have a training plan for that. 3/4 of them do. That is good. Some other additional findings not included in these charts. Smaller organizations, they are least likely to have a training plan. They're at 68%. Respondents beyond that small threshold, the mid-sized, the larger ones, they are much higher in having that. Again, I think that is good. We are approaching a more and more complex business environment. Even in today's deregulatory scene, we are only deregulating some parts of what goes on in corporate life in America. We are increasing the pressure in other parts. That is the same for many other parts of the world. It's very complex, and employees are going to be at a loss of what to do. So how effective is your training? Respondents from organizations in finance and insurance were most likely to say that their organization had a risk and compliance training plan. Again, not a big surprise. They are highly regulated, so that makes perfect logical sense. 84% of respondents who ranked their organization at the top of that maturity scale, the ones who are at the optimized level, they said that their organization has a training plan. When I see statistics like this, I also often like to argue the negative. How are you going to succeed without one? And how would your board respond to a compliance incident or a failure if you then had to stand up and say, well, we didn't really have an effective training program for that? So in many instances, when CEOs, CFOs are asking, why should we be funding this venture? Fund the venture because game out, how would this all look if we are not having an effective program? We don't do these things. And then we have an incident. So many different other stakeholder groups, from the board to regulators to the press and the shareholders, they all would be frowning upon it severely. So here's another one on top compliance training issues over the next several years. Again, when you think about it, not a surprise that 3 of the top 5 planned training topics for the next several years, they're related to data privacy, whether that is cybersecurity or artificial intelligence, or it's related to data, I should say, but privacy in there. Not at all a surprise to me when you think about what are the biggest issues that companies are struggling with. How do we adopt AI? How do we prevent a cybersecurity failure? How do we prevent a data privacy failure, which is always going to be expensive to fix and often makes you look unflattering in the press? So, of course, those issues are going to bubble up to the top. We did find it notable that planned AI training was now close to the bottom of the last year's group. And now it is very much at the top. I mean, I think it's just striking to see that within the space of a year, the awareness of AI risks and how are we going to get ahead of that has really surged up just in 1 year. It's not an exact apples to apples comparison. We have different companies responding to this survey every year, but I don't think anybody would dispute the basic thesis that an awareness of AI risks and how are we going to get ahead of that. That is a surging priority for compliance, for the management team, for the board, for pretty much everyone. Another notable shift is that 47% of last year's cohort said they planned diversity, equity, and inclusion training in 2025. That number went from 47% last year to 37% this year. Probably, again, not surprising when you think about it, that there is a general wariness about DEI, although you have a rather delicate needle to thread there, that anti-discrimination laws are still the law of the land. You do still have to have an awareness and training for that. But what is the difference between anti-discrimination and the DEI program that's going to give you regulatory troubles? That still is very hard for a lot of companies to understand. Some additional findings not included in the charts. So 53% of large companies, 10,000 employees and up, they are planning more whistleblower training in the next 2 or 3 years. That's compared to only 40% in the mid-sized range and 39%, so essentially the same number in smaller companies. So again, think about it. Whistleblowers are going to be an increasingly unpredictable variable in your ethics and compliance landscape. You want them to be on your side. They want to be on the company's side. That really just means they want to feel like they're heard when they call your internal hotline. And if they feel like they're not heard, they're going to have greater incentive, and they're going to have more people on the sidelines saying, you don't have to call the hotline at all. You can come call our whistleblower rewards program here at the regulator. How are you going to train employees to keep their concerns internal first? Why is that good to speak up? How do you train the managers for that? So that is more and more going to be an issue. And then I think we've got, is the last slide for this section. Carrie, I'll let it go back to you then for what we're going to do here. Unless you or Shon have any other thoughts, I'd be happy to hear them.
We still have a lot to cover, so I'm going to move along.
Sure.
We have so much to talk about and so little time here today. I want to spend just a few minutes as we pick up the pace a little bit here on our leadership commitment to compliance. And there's some very interesting findings here. I won't spend a bunch of time here on this, but I think it's really quite notable. This question asks specifically about true statements about management. And we broke this into senior management, middle management, and first line managers and supervisors. And so the good news is 2025 showed positive compliance and ethics behaviors among all of the different levels of management. 2/3 to 3/4 showing and encouraging compliance and ethical behavior in the organization. That's great. 60% said their senior executives have modeled the behavior, although to Matt's point about the negative, it's also notable that 40% were not seen as modeling the proper behavior. And some other negatives, I think, continue to raise some red flags for us here. 16% said senior leaders have impeded compliance personnel from effectively implementing compliance duties. And that was also consistent with responses at the middle and first line management. 9% said their leaders had directly encouraged employees to act unethically. And so all of those things are things to really focus on. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but you can see the positive behaviors up top and the less positive behaviors at the bottom. Encouraging employees to act unethically. You can see where there is some pressure on first line supervisors, perhaps a little bit more. Okay, next is about board engagement, and that's when we talk a lot about. Only 52% of the respondents said their board of directors has oversight of the program. I think it is surprising that only 1/3 have oversight of risk identification and management, and only slightly more than 1/3 hold executive sessions with compliance, which, as I think we all know, is an expected board responsibility in almost every framework that you can think of that might be out there. So just some thoughts on that. And then this one is always interesting to me. We discovered this one last year, and I know it looks confusing, but give me a moment to talk through it. We really wanted to know if strong board engagement would be associated with more positive management behaviors. So for ease of explaining this, we've put on the positive management behaviors are there in the box. And we've also put the 7 elements of board of director engagement there on the right. And to run the data, we really created a definition of below average and above average board engagement, meaning if they have less than 4 of those items there on the right, then we consider that to be below average board engagement. And if they have more than 4, then it's considered to be above average. And so with all of this context, the findings here are notable because when you see here, when you have above average board engagement, that even down to the first line managers, there is an increase in the behaviors, the positive management behaviors seen. And I think this is really an opportunity for boards who may often say that they can't influence organizational culture, but they do have an opportunity to influence just by having some engagement or above average engagement in the compliance program. Sends a message to leadership at all levels that this is important to the organization. So very interesting findings there. One other one that I always love to ask about is whether or not our respondents think that their management perceives their program to be unnecessary evil, an insurance policy, or a true strategic advantage to the organization. And I believe that the way we interact with leadership about our programs, perhaps how well it's supported, is really largely based on the perception of the value and the importance of our programs. So we did ask what people thought, and we did find that the belief is strongest among the senior leaders that compliance is a strategic advantage, but not all agree here. And when asked if senior leaders strongly agreed, then that also was about 37%. So there's a lot of interesting findings here. And I do think that the way our leaders perceive our programs can certainly have an influence, perhaps on how we're funded or how we're staffed or what we're able to present to the board of directors. All of those things, I think, are impacted by the perception that our leaders may have about our programs. So, Matt, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk for a minute about the intersection of risk and compliance.
Sure. Well, the news here, I think, is generally good. 1/3 of respondents in their organization said they had a centralized integrated risk management program run by senior management. 44% more said they are somewhere on that journey. That is 74% in total then who are moving in this integrated direction. That is roughly consistent with the 2024 answer to this question. And then another additional finding that you won't see right here is that respondents that were more mature on their ECI maturity curve, they were more likely to have a centralized risk management program compared to less mature organizations. I definitely think that is all moving in the right direction. Like to see that. Most say compliance is engaged in risk management. So the large majority, 70%, said the compliance function is highly engaged. Take that with compliance officers, respondents who said that compliance is moderately engaged in risk management. Combine those two together. That means 93% say compliance is at least engaged to some degree, if not a high degree, in risk assessment and risk management. That is a very positive signal, in contrast with earlier survey results that would suggest there's a disconnect between risk management and compliance. That is never a good thing, because that is what gets people to think that we're doing compliance just for the sake of compliance and cosmetic purposes. Should not be that way. So when we see these high numbers that they are very much integrated, that's a good thing. It appears that collaboration between these functions is occurring. Yes, that's good. But I still would like to see more or understand more about the exact nature of the collaboration. We don't yet have full visibility into that. We did find that a high level of engagement in data breaches for compliance. That is interesting. Then again, when you do have a breach, there's a lot of regulatory apparatus that swings into place. So I think it does point to the importance for this issue, and that's been indicated elsewhere in this survey on training priorities and whatnot, that data privacy is still something that the executive team thinks about a lot. How can compliance help with that? And you are generally going to be involved with that quite a lot. That is all good to know and to see. And then we have a polling question here. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being excellent, how would you rate the working relationship between compliance and risk at your organization? So you can rate it anywhere from 1, very poor, up to 5, excellent. Please take that, and we will push those results out in a minute or two. This is one of those things where I think in the fullness of time over the next 5 to 10 years, I would like to see more integration, as it seems to me that a lot of what the risk is going to be very much wrapped up in, are your controls working? Are your processes working? Do you understand how to build a strong and resilient process for cybersecurity or for third parties? I will always love to talk about corporate ethics as well, but the way that modern business works. So you're just going to need to get more and more enmeshed in the future. So let's see, I will give this another 10 seconds or so here, but it already looks like
it's been pushed. So the results are showing.
they are out. All right. Well, in that case, what is that? 43% who say good, 31% who say excellent. Add that up, it's about 75% of you who have a good, solid relationship with the risk management team. That is good. That's what we want to see. I will move on then. Go to the next slide. So who is using risk assessments to improve the risk and compliance program? Only 61% say they are using risk assessments to review and to test and improve your risk and compliance program. It would be nice if that number were higher, because the risk assessment is the foundation or the cornerstone for all else that you do. So I would encourage people to think about, where are you on that? Are you in the group or are you in the not? If you are not using a risk assessment, or why not? Even for organizations that have not conducted a formal risk assessment connected to their compliance program, many compliance managers are likely to have an informal sense of risk that can inform the elements of your compliance program, like the cadence of the training that you might offer, or when you should be updating policies. That's good. Did you have a good informal sense of risk? However, a more structured, disciplined, and data-driven sense of it would be better. And that is what a risk assessment can give you. So it's an important framework to think about when you're developing your compliance program. How can you get the risk assessment done and have that be the foundation? Build that in first. No change in risk assessment despite global shifts. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, given all of the major geopolitical shifts that we have seen. But our 2025 respondent pool, they pretty much matched the 70% from our 2024 respondent pool that said their risk assessment is current and subject to periodic review. That, again, begs the question of whether risk and compliance have a shared seat at the table. We would have thought this number to be smaller, given our 2025 respondents, because the global regulatory environment is very much in flux. It's shifted a lot. So are there triggering events that you might want to consider to go and do another risk assessment rather than keep it on a fixed cycle? Some additional findings. Those with risk and compliance programs indicated as being in one of the more high-level maturity, those who have a more mature program, they're more likely to say they have a risk assessment that is current and subject to periodic review compared to those in the lower two tiers. Those were more likely to be said to have an assessment informed by continuous access to operational data from the business functions. That is the ideal. If you have continuous access to the actual data from the business function, you're going to understand when you might need to pivot, when you might need to break from your pattern or cycle to invest more immediately in new policies or change up your training. So yet again, comes back to, do we have good data? Do we have fresh data? Do we have data from the business unit? If you have a seat at the table, odds are you're going to say yes to that question, that you do have the data, but the data is what makes your program live or die or succeed. Fear of exposing weakness is an uncommon barrier to risk assessments. That is good. I do not think at all that you should be afraid of exposing weakness. You should be looking to find weaknesses so that you can get them fixed. But only 9% of respondents said fear of exposing weakness and increasing the risk of discovery is the block to doing an effective compliance program. We consider that very positive. That said, only 1/4 of respondents said that their risk assessment process is effective. Maybe that could lead to some conversations you have on the compliance side with your risk management team, if they're separate from you, or talk with the internal audit team, if they're the ones who are doing an enterprise risk assessment and thinking about it. But why is your program not effective? That is a good question to ask yourself. Do you have a good risk assessment plan? Do you have a good risk assessment process? If you do, from that, you can try to figure out a whole lot of the rest of your risk management program, get in your compliance program. It gets a lot easier. So yet again, it comes down to, do you have a good risk assessment program? And then I think we are going to go on to third parties. Carrie, I know I've been assigned to this too. I don't know if you or Shon had any other comments about what we've gone through so far, though.
We did have some good questions that were coming in about risk assessments, and maybe we'll save those to the end. But
Okay.
there were definitely some really good questions on thoughts. Maybe I'll give you this one, and then we can move on to third parties. But thoughts on combining risk and compliance programs. I know you've got some thoughts on that because we've talked about it before.
I mean, I think that this is, I don't know that somebody's going to enact something to say, thou shalt consolidate now. I do think that a natural evolution towards some sort of standardized blended function, I think that's almost inevitable. You are going to wind up with more and more reliance on third parties, more and more data-centric, technology-centric risks, where you're going to need to rely on a constant awareness of what is this risk and are we managing it. And I will never shy away from having a good discussion about corporate ethics, but I think the challenges around risk and internal controls are only going to go up. And so some sort of more close collaboration. Do we want to call it an evolution? Do we want to consolidate it? Do you want to call it something else? I don't know. And I don't know when this is going to happen, but I think compliance and risk management are going to be much more enmeshed with each other, say by 2030, than we'll see right now. I'll stop there. But yeah, it's a good question that I think we're only going to be moving in that direction. At what speed, I don't know, but that's the direction of the arrow.
I mean, if you think about it, risk assessment is the foundational element of a compliance program. So I agree with you. It's inevitable.
Yeah. So oversight of third parties, everybody's favorite issue because it drives us all so crazy. Only 58% of respondents to this question said that they screened their third parties or suppliers for regulatory compliance, which by definition, if you flip it around, that means 4 in 10 did not say that they screened their third parties for regulatory compliance. Likewise, only 54% said they screened for cybersecurity and data protection. Across the board, these were the only two aspects where more than half of respondents said they did screening for their third parties. We only went down from there. In a similar question presented to last year's respondents, response rates for these elements were stronger, where 71% said they screened for regulatory compliance, 59% last year said they were screening for cyber and data concerns. I would watch these numbers closely in the future. Maybe we had a radical shift in who is actually taking the survey this year compared to last year, but these numbers should not be going down. They should be going up because we're only going to rely on third parties more often. We are only going to encounter more cybersecurity risks in the future. So the ability to screen these third parties for their regulatory compliance, for their cybersecurity, for other risks, that is only going to become more important in the future. A capable compliance program will need to get better at this. So some other issues from this slide. You can see what we found was in Europe organizations, they were slightly less likely than those in North America to say they screen for third parties. North America, the number was 60%. Europe, it was 54%. They were more likely to screen for global trade risk in Europe. Okay. More likely to screen for ESG concerns than North America. So it was 38% versus 30 for global trade risk. 38% versus 20 for ESG risks. Again, I'm not surprised because Europe overall, they depend on exports more than US companies. They have export to more jurisdictions, and export controls and global sanctions were not as much of a concern 1 year ago as they are in the Trump 2.0 administration. So a lot of sense there. And then I think we have one more third-party slide I will move on to. 1/3 of respondents said they strongly agree their due diligence program reduces their organization's legal, financial, and reputation risks. 51% somewhat agreed. That means the vast majority of them, 84%, they do agree that having third-party due diligence is good. It's important. It helps your company. That's great. I agree with that. That is a correct interpretation. But our previous slide just said 54% of you do it, which means, or 58% of you screen, 40% of you don't screen. There's a disconnect here that needs to be studied and appreciated, that clearly third-party screening capabilities are important, but we're still seeing a large portion of companies not doing it. I'm hard-pressed to see how those companies not screening or not putting more emphasis on third-party risk management, I don't see how that's sustainable in the regulatory climate, in the cyber climate, and in the business economic climate generally that we are moving to. Your ability to understand what your third-party risks are and how to tune your third parties in or out of your landscape based on the risks they pose, that's only going to get more important. So we have some statistics that are heartwarming here. We have some that are not, but those are some very interesting findings that we have here that underline just how complicated your third-party risk issues are. So, Carrie, I think that's it for me. And then we are switching over to AI, everybody's favorite subject. There we are.
Yeah, Matt, thank you. Yeah, everyone's talking about it. Who is responsible for it was the subject of the poll. So I will move us down to that. The responsibilities for AI policies, which department's most responsible was the question, came out with 39% saying IT was responsible for AI policies. There is, and then you see they drop down from there, information security, compliance, cross-functional. It may come as no surprise to see IT and information security leading the way on this. I think there is much concern about the use of AI has focused on the corresponding use of data and related technologies. I think there are still many other factors to consider as these technologies mature and the regulatory environment evolves around this. I think it's going to be very interesting with AI changing, if not on a daily basis, at least a weekly basis, where these responsibilities are going to settle in the years to come. The larger organizations of 10,000 or more, less likely to have IT responsible. So I would assume and or hope that risk and legal are a little more included there, but don't know, can't tell from the findings. The next, we moved on to what were the top AI concerns as identified in the survey. The lack of visibility to risks across the organization, add that together with gaps in implementation and compliance controls. I think all of this is speaking to just a general climate of concern regarding oversight, what's happening, what's not happening as AI is implemented across various organizations. I think this, to me, supports the importance of compliance having that equal seat at the table as organizations navigate both their concerns about use of and implementation of AI into their organizations. What were again, the identified top risks in the use of AI? Did I get that? Did I move that forward? Yeah, I did. There we go. Inappropriate use of other folks' intellectual property. We see that poking up, but it's interesting in some of the cases how it's not been found to be inappropriate use. Losing data from within the organization. I think what they're talking about here is adding private or sensitive data into a public large language model. 60% of respondents said they were most concerned about some sort of data flow issue related to the use of AI. Over a quarter said they were concerned about incorrect responses, the hallucinations. I find that low. I don't know if folks are becoming more confident that hallucinations are being managed a little bit better. What I thought was very surprising to me was the bias, that 10% of the respondents said they were concerned about bias in AI, literally the algorithms that are collecting and reporting out the data. I think this could manifest in many areas of an organization's operations, starting from the resume scanning at the door of your organization to how are they analyzing your business processes and what kind of answers are you getting back. Next up, we talked about AI, or we asked about AI and its importance relative to the compliance program. And the quarter of the respondents said AI is considered significantly important, as you see at the top. With moderately at 41%, 2/3 of the respondents said AI is important in some regard. As we've heard everything about AI and its impact on business processes, I suspect this is going to be just the beginning of opportunities available to take compliance programs in certain aspects to their next level. With that, Carrie, I will pitch it over to you.
All right. Matt, any final thoughts from you on AI? I know you feel pretty strongly about a few things here too.
Well, I would just emphasize that we should not lose sight of the governance forest through the AI risk trees. For all of the specific risks that we might be worried about with AI, the biggest risk you have is that people within your enterprise are using an AI system right now and you don't know it. You don't know where that AI came from. They could have sourced it from some SaaS vendor out there that you've never heard of. They sneak it on. And the ability to govern the use of third-party AI software that your employees want to do what, Lord knows, that kind of thing, like that's the risk. Build up a solid governance process for how you bring AI into the extended enterprise. And after that, all of the specific risks get easier to manage. But it's the governance question that's going to really come up and bite people in the rear end.
All right. So as we said, we weren't able to cover everything in the report. So again, encourage you to download the full report. We're at final thoughts. We've got another poll question. Then we really pushed to make sure we got to some time to answer Q&A. So really excited. We've got some time to get to Q&A, but I'm going to start with you, Matt. Final thoughts, overall takeaway, and then Shon, I'll go to you, and then I'll wrap up our conclusion. But Matt, what's your final thoughts or key takeaway?
Well, the one thing I came back to was what I had talked about first earlier in the webinar about program maturity. And I think that compliance officers should not beat themselves up too much if you feel like your program isn't as mature as you want. It doesn't necessarily have to be the perfect compliance program. It has to be good at those things you need to be good at. And like I had mentioned before, continuous improvement does not mean you are always improving at every moment on all things forever. It means when you need to improve, you can improve. And in fact, if you look at the Justice Department's guidelines for an effective compliance program that talks about how you can become effective, the actual phrase they use that jumps out to me is capacity to improve and evolve. That means you are well placed within your organization to know what the risks are, so you can understand that we have to evolve this way, not evolve the other way. You have the resources to be able to improve. But overall, I looked at the maturity. I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be. And then I worry a lot about AI risks right now, but I just talked about how I think the governance issues there are going to be more important. But there's a lot in this report to think about.
Yeah, Carrie, yeah, I will say that in all of this, from third party to data breaches to cybersecurity to AI, I would say and firmly believe your people are your greatest strength in your organization.
Yep.
And at the same time, they are your most glaring weakness. So if you do not have not that I'm trying to get legal any more work in your organizations, but if you do not have well-defined policies that are distributed throughout your organization on how things, including AI, cybersecurity, data, how it should be handled, you're setting yourself up for failure. And that's huge from an AI standpoint. I would expect you, I would encourage you to develop a very well understood and well distributed AI policy and make sure all of your people know that and are held to account for it.
Great. All right. Well, again, there was so much in this report that we wanted to cover. There certainly was a lot to celebrate. We had a lot of good findings around the roles of leadership. We had just really good findings around maturity, although I did note the person who highlighted that even though many folks identified themselves as having, fairly mature or optimized programs, that there were still only half that had a hotline. And so there were several disconnects that we noted throughout the process. So I think in general, we do have some red flags. I certainly, as any of you have heard me speak before, know that if we want our employees to speak up, we have to really focus on preventing and detecting retaliation, having good policies, taking strong actions. We know that these cases aren't substantiated at a very high rate from our hotline benchmarking reports. And so I do think we have opportunities there to ensure that, to Matt's point, that people feel like they can come to us as opposed to our friendly regulators. So I think many opportunities there. So with that, we do want to get to some questions. I'm going to put up one more poll, and we will leave that up while we start to get to some Q&A. This one is, would you like to speak with NAVEX to discuss your risk and compliance program and any of the solutions that we can offer to assist you? So answer choice is yes, I'm interested in exploring solutions. I'm also interested in speaking with Matt Kelly directly. That means you give us permission to give Matt your contact information, or no, thank you, I am all set. So we'll leave that up. I don't know if Matt and Shon, if you've had a moment to take a look at some of the questions that have come in, if you have.
I have one, Carrie. Number 34, I'll respond to. I saw the data, Nancy, thanks for the question. I saw data mini compliance reporting to legal. Is that a concern? I'm not advocating for or against that. Being the chief legal officer, I can tell you I have the advantage at NAVEX in great partnership with Carrie Penman, Chief Compliance and Risk Officer, and Cindy Raz, our Chief People Officer. And we manage these cases together, depending upon who is best suited to handle that. I would hope that it wouldn't be a problem, but I would also say that definitely is not a requirement. I think your board needs visibility into this, and however that gets there, and be it direct, I don't like it filtered, I think is the best answer. But again, I don't know your organizational structure on is that best suited for the personnel you have in place.
All right, Matt, was there one you wanted to grab?
Yeah, so here's one, number 43. Can you speak to the shift, as I perceive it, the person says, from years past? It seems like anti-bribery, corruption, financial integrity, and topics are relatively lower priorities than in the past. Well, Yes and no. I mean, it is fair to say, we'd be foolish not to, that anti-corruption enforcement is a lower priority for the Trump administration broadly, although not entirely. So there are going to be people in your enterprise who are going to say, well, why are we bothering with this? It's not like we're ever going to get caught. That is short-sighted in two ways, and I would encourage compliance officers to get ahead out of that. Number one, you don't know when somebody might go to the Justice Department and report an FCPA violation of yours anyways. And it could linger around for a long time. They could wait until there's another administration with different enforcement priorities at some point in the future. We've talked about that before. It's also fairly easy right now, if you have an FCPA issue, just to report it. And the department has been pretty clear that they will give you a declination so long as you self-report, disclose, disgorge the ill-gotten profits, and then you remediate and cooperate with them. You're going to get a declination. It's kind of easy. But that said, I think the thing that I would emphasize more is go to management and say, does this mean you want a pro-corruption attitude to take root in the company? That's terrible. And a lot of the worries that they still have, such as embezzlement, such as accounting fraud because an employee wants to cheat the company, like the controls you still need for all of that bear a striking resemblance to the anti-corruption FCPA controls we've had for a long time. And just about every embezzlement scheme I've ever seen, it looks like an FCPA violation except for the F. Instead of it going to a foreign government official, the money is going to somebody's back pocket. But how you catch it is still the same. And there are going to be plenty of other ways, contract fixing, and there are domestic bribery concerns as well. So there is going to be an attitude out there that maybe we don't need to take this seriously anymore. That's not the right attitude, and it can be knocked down, and I think it should be knocked down, because if you let that attitude take root, it's going to wind up catching up with you in a bad way at some point in the years to come. I don't know when, but this is not a good idea. So maybe there's I don't want to say a bad attitude, but there's a misplaced perception or a misperception of how this is becoming unimportant. It's not becoming as unimportant as some cynics might think.
Did you mention the statute of limitations too?
I'm happy to say it goes on for years and years. It could come back and haunt you at any given time.
Yeah, there's that, right? There's that.
Hey, Carrie, if I can grab one more, or if I don't know if you want to grab one, that number 65, and Paul at JRM Construction, I appreciate the question. What are some of the best ways to communicate internally with staff on compliance issues? I think it goes back to several slides that we went through and we found in the report. And it's an overused phrase, but I'm going to say it. Tone at the top. There, everybody is watching. And that when they see someone at the top taking compliance seriously, and that feeds down through your group. And Matt talked about a little bit in his slides that anytime you have a delta or any gap where you have not clearly explained what's expected, silence isn't going to work. That compliance is required throughout your organization, and it's a priority. And that it isn't just the compliance department against the rest of the group, them patrolling you. When you make everybody, I will say it, compliance ambassadors, culture ambassadors, when everybody's on board with that, and that is the mantra of your organization, it is effective and infects the organization. And it's fantastic. And the absence of that has the opposite effect, in my experience, across NAVEX's 13,000 customers and the people I interact with on a daily basis in all sizes, verticals, etc.
Right. All right. I'm going to just grab one quick one and not do it justice, but I'll just make a couple points. And that is, what does whistleblower training look like? I think it's really, really important to talk to employees about where a call goes, Who takes the call? What's going to happen when they call? What information will you be able to tell them once the investigation is completed? What information will you not be able to tell them once the investigation is completed? So really encourage you to just talk a lot about the process. And I would also recommend that you have that on your intake page, because people don't often listen until they're thinking about making a report. Happy to take more questions offline about that as well. But right now, I just want to give a huge, huge thank you first to the Harris Poll for partnering with us. Thank you to Matt and Shon for joining me on the session today. I want to give a special shout out to our team that wrote the report, Eric Neckow, and then also to our data team that analyzed all of the data from the Harris Poll. Thank you all as well for attending the session today. Really, really appreciate your time, and it was a great discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you.